Hello YouTube. Today, by request, we have the FNX45. I'm not going to go into gory detail on the why they made this, how they made this kind of thing. This is there's this version. There's also the tactical, which comes with a threaded muzzle and kite and a cutout for optics. Other than that, since it was asked for, we're just going to dive into it. I'm going to tell you that there's a couple things in here that FN really just doesn't want people doing sometimes, and so they make things really hard. One is getting the firing mechanism off. Notice I've left this piece unscrewed for now because I don't feel like fighting with it again. Another one is getting the locking block in and out. You can do it with regular tools, but I recommend something that lets you pry open stuff. So we'll get to all that shortly, but just so you know, this is a little bit not for the faint of heart, I guess I would say. And unlike most guns, there's not a whole lot of user serviceable parts inside. These parts have been made pretty much as small as they can be made and still function, and doesn't give you much room to do a whole lot of improvements from a gunsmithing standpoint. But anyway, enough said. Standard large frame style takedown, lever rotates, and for those who don't know, this is the safety as well as a decocker. So functionally, that's what's going on there. And to take it down, we can just slide that right off. I'm going to set the frame aside. And everything's so big. Alright, captivated guide rod, which is nice. Also a metal guide rod. I'm a fan of metal guide rods. Nothing overly interesting going on. A big old 45 barrel. Now, there's a couple caveats we're going to get into. One is that you can't take the firing pin safety all the way out without removing the sights. And I really don't want to take these sights off because I don't have the sight tool here. I have it at the shop, and there's no real need to, but essentially it comes out through the top of the gun. It's not the first gun to do that, probably won't be the last. I still find it obnoxious. The other thing is that this back plate, unlike a 1911, which slides in there and then is pretty flush around the firing pin, this one actually has a fairly good-sized gap around the firing pin. And that means that this plate is going to flop all over the place if they don't have some other mechanism to retain it. And their solution for that was to basically crimp little bends into the corners of the plate, making it so that it's in the gun very solidly without any, the firing pin is not what's holding it in place, essentially. And so in order to get it out, you kind of have to find a sweet spot in here where you can lever it out a little bit. And let's see, I like to push the firing pin in. Oops, I'm not doing this very gracefully, but the idea is I'm getting the firing pin started in, and I'm flopping it over onto something, and then I'm going to get the whole thing lined up. I'm actually going to start to tap the rear, the catch plate down, and there's no real good way to do that. It is, believe it or not, starting to move. Now, I've seen people take these down and have no problem, and it just slips off. I think that maybe the tactical doesn't do it this way. Alright, so I've now made it to step 2, so to speak. At this point, the firing pin, it's down enough. I've got it up, what is that, about 32nd of an inch. And so that means the firing pin can't come all the way back anymore, which makes it a lot easier because now I can switch to some other tool to try and tap that plate the rest of the way off. So here's the plate, and you can see what I was talking about the corners being pinched up there. So it's basically stamped down to give it those retention lugs. I'm going to push the firing pin safety in, and that should get me my firing pin and spring. And you notice that the firing pin safety sticks out a lot further now, but you're not going to rotate it out or anything. It's a big square piece on the inside. You'll also note that there ain't nothing back here involved with the extractor system. They did not drill out any part of it. They wanted a big ass heavy receiver here. So in order to get the extractor claw out, you've got to come in with something, a small flattish screwdriver kind of thing, and get in front of the pin and pull the retaining pin back, and then rotate the extractor out. So it's in there like that. Once I pulled the pin back, I just grabbed it by the front and flipped it forward. You can't pull it straight out the side because it's oversized. So the outside of the gun's only got this much space, and it's got this big old hook to hang on to that big 45 round, which means that that hook dips down below the frame, and so you can't pull it out to the right. You've got to drop it out on the inside. After that, you have spring and pin, and the extractor itself, and that's it. So as far as uppers go, ain't a whole lot of rocket science happening here. Nothing you haven't seen before. It's simpler than most full frame guns. So now they also left us a path all the way into the firing pin chamber, which means that's a nice pathway for dirt to get all the way in there too, unfortunately. Putting it back together, same process. Get the extractor started. Now, sometimes these are made so that you can kind of He-Man push them back in with the extractor itself. That little green spring was a little stiff for me, and so whoops. So I still put the extractor there to catch my pin so I don't launch it across the room. But I just there we go. I just prefer to do it that way. Haven't monkeyed up the outside of the slide that way yet. Firing pin and spring. The spring is bidirectional. It doesn't really matter. There's no front. There's no back. It's flat ground on both sides, and the coils are the same size. Do have to push the firing pin safety in, of course, to get it to go. Now, don't forget when you put this piece back in that one of the edges is going to be curved, and that's the one that you want facing out. The straight flat edge goes against the rest of the gun. The curved one is there to actually take the motion of the hammer and cam it down, so it needs to be curved. And once again, checking where that curve is. Got it to the back. And I'm going to get that started. And then I'm going to find something to push my firing pin the rest of the way in. Alright, and that's as far in as it goes right now, which ain't all the way. And so we've got to tap it all the way back down to where it was before. And the way I do that, I don't want to tap on this piece here. If I deform this, that's going to affect the way it engages the hammer, and essentially that's just bad. So I'm going to come and I'm going to tap right on the raised wings, and I'm going to do it as evenly as I can on each side because I want to bring it straight down essentially. So now I've brought it down to essentially just about flush with the frame, but I need to go further because we haven't reached the point where the firing pin can come all the way through the hole yet. So once again, going on just the shoulders of the piece with a smaller punch now. Tap that down. There, my firing pin is now popped out. And last thing I want to do is feel my way through to make sure that I have not left a rough spot, and that this piece isn't dragging, that it's definitely higher up in the frame than the rest of it. You want that to be able to cam the hammer back smoothly and all that. So that really should be nice smooth transition. And of course, make sure that you haven't bound anything up firing pin wise. I think we're good to go. Now, as easy as that was, relatively speaking, it goes downhill pretty sharply when we get to the frame. So, first thing I'm going to talk about is that you've got this end, which is hard to get apart, and you've got this end, which is hard to get apart. So you've got complicated and complicated, and that leaves you with nothing that's easy. The hard part here is that the left side of the safety / decocker actually is the pin and goes all the way through. The right side is attached to the far end of that. And from what I've read, there's at least 2 different attachment mechanisms. If your right side safety has a hole on both it's a tiny hole, all right? If you see this screw here, that's the size of the hole, and it looks even smaller when it's down in the plastic. So if you have a hole on the bottom that you can see and not one on the top, then you've got this situation. This is actually a hex head screw for a hex head wrench that is tiny as all hell. I don't have one. I actually ended up manufacturing one and kind of tearing up the end of the screw. If you have the model with the hole on the bottom and the top, I am told that that's a detent model, and that all you need for those is to get a nice piece of metal and poke it in there, and you'll feel the detents click, and once you've clicked the top and bottom, then the side just pops off. In my case, I had to sit there and basically carefully unscrew it little bit by little bit. Then I eventually carved an edge across the middle of it to turn it into a flat blade screwdriver thing. And then once that's there, that comes right off. So if you can see the hole there, is that on camera? No. If you can see the that hole, that was what the pin was going through. So, excuse me. I gotta get a drink here. Hang on. Oh, sorry about that, guys. I've been talking too much today. So, good news and bad news. Hopefully, you'll be able to get yours off the right side without too much carnage, difficulty, however you want to look at it. The other thing I recommend is that you actually pull the trigger to fire it and let it come all the way forward when you do this next step. If you let the decocker have it, it doesn't come back all the way. It's the equivalent of a half cock notch, but they built it differently. But basically, where it leaves the hammer is a little bit hard for you to get through. I'm going to describe. Actually, while I've got it open in all the parts work at once, let me give you a quick once over for how this is happening. The trigger bar, which is it's an actual trigger. It's a bow trigger. It goes around both sides and comes across the middle, and it does most of its work. It engages with a leg on the hammer that you can't see. So when I pull that double action, the trigger bar is pushing against a leg of the hammer, which is pushing it all back, and that's all well and good. And then another part of the trigger bar encounters the firing pin safety activator. So if I hold back the hammer, and we watch this when I pull the trigger, you see that's the first thing that comes up is the firing pin safety. And if you can see this construct here, it goes under the sear. So if I continue to pull the trigger, it lifts the sear up. So the sear is holding the hammer right here, a little white space there so you can see. When I pull this, I'm going to do this to activate the firing pin spring, and then this, and that activates the sear, and I can clear them both. Now, if I instead had used the decocker, what you'll see is the decocker drops the sear up while leaving the firing pin safety still engaged. So the hammer can come forward, but not all the way. The firing pin system is still in its way. So see how they're not level? And this stop ledge right here is where it's catching everything on. A normal fired condition, it stops you only at the very top, and the hammer is just about perfectly straight up and down. That's where it catches you with the hammer drop version. So like I said, for disassembly, we're going to bring it all the way forward, and at that point you can slide the leg and safety out. And this whole mechanism will come up and out. And what you really want to do is pay attention to clearing. This is that leg of the hammer I was talking about, and you need to get it off of the trigger bar here. So as you're coming out, you really, and don't worry about the parts falling out. You want to kind of bend it forward, and then it'll have room to slide out. Essentially, we just slid the trigger bar out right here. So trigger bar was in there, it was vertical like this, sitting in that space. We brought this up, and then we rotated it to about there, where we could then get a vertical surface to slide out this little gap. And before I mess stuff up too much, let me go put this piece on, which I just dropped off the other side. And temporarily put this back in the frame. Whoops. So with any luck, I can show you some of how this works without having the whole thing assembled. Is always exciting. Now, part of my problem is that they rely on the frame itself to hold these two side mechanisms in. The side mechanisms are providing the tension for the safety and the decocker. So over on this side, this whole mechanism is so that the safety gets a nice solid thump when you turn it on, and that turning it off also involves a snap. So that's what's going on here. There's a spring and two big pieces of metal. That's just to provide you the snap on and snap off of the safety. On the other side, you have a similar set of spring engagements with weird angles, and basically that one is providing the tension to bring it back up to the median position after you've done a hammer drop. And actually, I think there's tension on both sides involved in that particular part of it. Yeah. So both sides contribute to the force and the return after the hammer drop. As far as I can tell, only really the right side contributes to the snap of the safety. However, it's the left side which is the operational part of the safety, because the safety is pretty straightforward. This little appendage, we'll call it, up here, this piece that's free flopping around, it actually reaches over the top of the trigger bar. So the trigger bar is being pulled up spring-wise towards the top of the gun, and it needs to be at the top of the gun to operate. The whole safety concept is that when I put the safety on, it's going to push this part up and therefore this part down. So that's putting the safety into the on position. That's the only thing that changes. The sear is still accessible. Everything else in the gun stayed right where it was from a functional standpoint. Nothing else is blocked. That safety is it's a trigger disconnect is what it is. So that is going to now push the trigger bar permanently into or hold it in a down position, and in the down position it can't engage the other parts that it normally would. So what are the parts that the trigger engages? This piece here, now the trigger bar, like I said, comes under here. Crap, I'm just barely off again. Sorry, I need to redo my viewing area for you guys. So in case I really screwed that up, this leg here is the safety in the not active position, and when you flip the safety on, it pushes the front leg down, which is going to push down on the back of the trigger bar. So the trigger bar that sits in here, normally this is where it pushes for the double action stroke. This is the hammer leg, and it's just going to push straight back on that, which is going to cock the hammer. And then this here that it runs into, that's the actual firing pin safety. That's the underside of the firing pin safety. So if I do cock this, what you'll see is as those sear and firing pin safety came back, more of that leg is exposed. And what's going to happen is when the trigger bar bumps into that, it will lift firing pin safety and sear consequentially, and the hammer goes boom. Now I didn't lift mine well enough, and so I actually landed in the half notch position, but well, there's a couple different ways around that, and it's not overly important right now. So anyway, functionality wise, that's what's going on. There we go. The hammer springs are these guys here, built right into this little widget. So this little widget is really almost all of the gun, and that has some advantages and some disadvantages. So we're going to take this all the way apart, but we're going to get the guts out of the gun first. The rail system is designed to be replaceable, so the rails just snap right out of the gun. Now, I guess technically you could get them backwards and confused, but it would be kind of obvious, because the rails would then be going towards the inside of the gun, where they wouldn't actually connect to anything. No rail on the inside. But anyway, in case you're not a genius in that regard, or you're tired, they conveniently put a R for right and L for left on them. Considering it comes from a non-English speaking country, I suspect that says a little bit about their opinion of English speakers' intelligence, but who knows? I consider it a courtesy. To get the front down, this is where things get weird. First part, not so weird. There's a spring on this, and I just knocked it out of the detent, so put it back into the detent. There we go. There's a nice big groove here, almost looks like a roller, and that pin that the spring down there guides into it, and it has two positions that it actually snaps into along that path. And it's the same spring that comes over the top here and provides downward pressure for the slide lock to move around. I was moving the trigger as well. So to get this out, you really just have to get past that spring, which you do by just moving it part of the way over, and then when you get the end out, just push down again. That's a little side view of that spring in action there. And here's where it's going to get really ugly. So the locking block is in there, but again, here we have a set of rails that are also removable rails, but there's no space because they're in the gun already, and they go, this locking block goes all the way through the rails. So these two blocks right there, what you're seeing, that metal going straight through, that's the locking block. So it's solidly in metal. And then it's got this other support block at the front, which just has two smaller ones, which look like maybe you could knock those out and have some luck. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the same thing. You have to spread the rails apart, and it's a little bit terrifying until you get further into it, and I'll show you why. So I have not found the perfect mechanism for doing this, but this comes as close as anything. These are channel locks, which normally would have these pins in them, and I use them to get C-clamps off, like the delta ring clamp on an AR or whatever. They have some defined use in automotives or whatever, but what they have is the ability to change from being like pliers, where when you squeeze it they close, to being spreaders. And that's what we need here, is spreaders. And basically what we want to do is come in right behind the locking block and towards the top, and spread it wide enough to get the locking block out. And too much butterfingers today. And so your locking block, pay attention to which way was up. I mean, if you think it through, it'll make sense. This is basically the feed ramp, and then the top. Don't put it in upside down. It might actually fit, but you'd be really unhappy. And there you can see that those big honkin' square blocks on the side, like a freaking Lego, where it goes in there. Now you can use pliers if you've got strong enough hands to pull them apart. You know, there's probably some epic trick to doing that. Don't know what it is, but that's the way I found that works. Let's see, what else is there? Oh, and now everything else is being retained by this one pin, and we're just going to drive that out. Now that pin does have a notch, and the spring actually is in that notch, so it will take a solid tap to get it started. I mean, I guess in theory, if it was really well lubricated, then maybe I could do that without actually tapping it, and that if I put just a little pressure on it and I manipulated the spring at the same time, that's one way apparently to get past it. So now I can theoretically just push that pin the rest of the way out, and that's the big groove that the spring was sitting in. So maybe that'll save a little wear and tear on our spring there. Put a finger over it when I pulled this out, because the first time I did this, I launched this spring across the room, and that took almost 4 hours to recover from till 5 a.m. yesterday. Then your slide lock, it's activated on the by the magazine on the left side, but other than that, it's ambidextrous. And the trigger bar, trigger assembly, trigger and trigger bar assembly. This is actually an assembly. Do not go after this pin. If this pin drifts at all left or right, it will bind in the firearm, because as you're pulling it really moves right along that line. And FN, if yours drifts, will send you a new assembly, and that's a big beefy spring in there at a really messed up angle as well. So that's another thing that you don't want to have to try and rig up a press to put this back together. And it is peened in, and so that's the press finishing mark, so that it shouldn't come apart on you. This up here is the ledge for the disconnect stroke, where the frame will knock it back down. This ledge here, oddly enough, is where the safety bar actually interacts with it. So when this is all the way in the gun and the safety's on, that's where it pushes down on. It's right in there. Not really sure why they bothered not to make that straight. I haven't gone through it mathematically to see exactly why. But anyway, the point is, don't take this bit apart. Now for the rest of this, there's some easier ways to get at it. If you're like me, what you'll find right here is that just when you spread it, you've already got this one out of alignment. And there, I popped it back in. But the important thing here is this. If you ever played with the FN box as well, you'll notice that the plastic is really flexible. It's borderline rubber in its flexibility. And that means that you can, with a little bit of gentle coaxing, you can bring those rails out from this position and begin to manipulate them out of the gun like that. So again, I don't think you really need to do any of this for general maintenance. Once again, they've labeled them right and left for you. The important part is that the rail side faces out. So reassembling it, we can just pop them right into their final destinations. But then you say, all right, well, how about this piece? Can you really just pressure slide this guy in there? And my guess is, if I was a big machine, then probably yes. Like if I were some sort of giant pressing machine, then maybe. But since I'm just wussy old me, it's pretty hard to get this one all the way in down there. Not necessarily impossible. So again, you've got options. You either spread it apart again, or you try and get clever in how you put it together. And so I'll show you what I did that I considered to be mildly clever, which was basically lined it up beforehand. And started it in a little bit after the fact. Is that what I did? No, I feel like I can't possibly have done it that way because it's not going in. Yeah, that ain't what I did. Alright, so since I can't remember exactly how I did this, I thought I'd come up with something mildly clever last time. So I will just do the spreader. Where did I put it? Apparently I'm just a terrible shot. Well, now, that's getting silly. Yeah, that's what it was. I had just done it manually. So, that's kind of the key there, is that when you've got this open, you can see exactly how much this can flex. Remember, you don't want to flex towards the bottom where it's going to crack. You are just trying to move the top bits. And anyway, getting the locking block in, we'll use the stretchers again, but we'll do that after we've put everybody back. So trigger bar drops right in, drops in on top of it, and we're going to get this pin in. I'm going to put the pin in from the other side, because I found it was easier to keep to get it synced up with the initial path if I came in from this side, because basically while your pin is starting its way in, you're gonna have to get something to hold this spring all the way down against the pressure on both sides. And once you get it through the first piece, now you're right away lining up with the next one, and that's the takedown, or the slide stop itself. And then the next piece we go through is the actual trigger. Oops. There we go. Oh my goodness. Did you guys see the stupid thing that I just did? I was not paying attention to my pin, and I put it in wrong side out. And as I mentioned, there's a groove in the pin. It locks right the hell in there. And so now I have to fight my own whoopsie and coax that pin to come out. Just being so nice to it and not having to hit it with a hammer. Thought we would end the day as friends, but apparently not today. See that? Almost launched the spring again. Alright, so the idiot factor there was me putting the spring in with the latching end first, guaranteeing that every millimeter I moved it, it would try to latch on something new. So once again, we're going to lay the spring in there roughly where it belongs, and we're going to use something to poke it down deep enough that the pin can catch it, and then from the other side try and line up the next piece in line. Then trigger. Excellent. So now that we lined it up first, get it back in there. Bar works. Trigger bar still moves backwards and up when you pull it. And it's latched in. The spring is latched in on its little place, which is also what holds it, in place for us there. And now, our favorite terrifying bit, this little locking block. And when you're looking at it like this, you might have that reaction like, no way, not gonna happen. That's just too big. How am I ever gonna get it in there? I'm gonna grab the barrel for a minute while I've got the locking block out. I always mean to do this on these videos and sometimes forget that it always helps to illustrate the locking block's function. And in this case, since the locking block does come apart like this, this makes it, kind of easy on us. So the barrel ramp, when it's closed, when the breech is closed, sits up here. And remember, we're upside down despite the fact that it says up. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be up or just UP as part of my serial number. Anyway, so the ramp sits like this. So this is it in the gun. It sits like this, but we're going to look at it upside down so that we can see exactly what happens. When she go bang, then the barrel is going to start coming backwards. And lo and behold, we make contact with that part of the ramp. Now the lug can't move, which means the barrel is going to rise. When it was in the gun, it would lower. So that's what's going on. It sits nice and happily on the lug when it fires, and then as it slides back, it gets caught by that piece and lowered right down the ramp that way. When it unlocks, the exact opposite's happening. Again, the lug doesn't really move. The barrel comes, and now it's this piece and the ramp that is actually engaging it. So when it goes bang, it's this part that's handling all that weight and catching it, and when it racks forward, it's this ramp that rides it back up into position. So if you're ever stuck with a locking block trying to figure out which way is up or how does it go, you'll find that there's only going to be one orientation where any of that stuff actually works. And there we go, the one orientation where it works, that lets you know that you're putting it in the gun correctly. So again, what we're going to do here is I'm going to start the locking block on one side, doesn't really matter which, and I'm just going to have my finger there to guide it in on the other side, and I'm going to use my handy dandy channel locks. And I missed. Try again. I didn't say it was easy. There we go. Now, once I got it in there, if you note, this is an important thing. See how it's got the space? That means it's not all the way together. And the reason is that this piece is not in alignment. So it's holding the rails too far out. This is in the right spot, but this guy wiggled out just a little bit. So we're going to pop him back into place. And now, almost, I mean, you can hear it just a little bit, but essentially no visible moving around in there. If you rattle it, you can hear it. And actually, as the frame returns to its original size, we'll stop hearing that altogether. So obviously this is not part of your regular cleaning. You know, you don't want to have to go and do that to a gun that often. It's also debatable whether or not doing it with the pin in is bad for the pin. And I haven't made my mind up. I assume if you bend it too far, then you could be bending the pin. But the idea is to really just spread it apart, so hopefully not. The challenge is, though, if this block is in here and you haven't put the pin in, it's nearly impossible to get the spring to line up. It's just under too much pressure at too many points to stay where you need it to stay, or at least that's what I found. I don't know. Somebody's always got a tip, and that's what they put comments for. All right, so last bit on this is putting this back in, and I like to help this along at the very beginning. Just get it past the spring a little bit manually, and then rotate the body in so I get it up to the second section. And again, because this spring does have a little bit of room, it can wiggle. You should go back in and make sure that it's in the groove, and it will be happy and reliable and snap just right in the groove. So gonna put these guys aside again and focus fully on explaining how to get in and out of the fire control mechanism in one piece. It's kind of a joke because there's just a lot of pieces. So I'm gonna, let's see, I think that's, yes, we're off safe, and so I'm gonna pull this guy apart. So first things first, these little plates, the left one and the right one, they are different sizes, and you'd want to try and keep them straight. I did not find a way to really put it together wrong. This is not just, you know, a smooth tube. It's got grooves that these cuts line up with. So there's only going to be, you know, one orientation, excuse me, when you get this bad boy on. That was exactly upside down. But the point is, you know, there's going to be a top, bottom, left, and right no matter how you slice it. In this case, not even, just a top and a bottom. So not a whole lot of ways that you have the option to screw these up. Just remember which side which one came from, and you'll do good. These spring mechanisms, there's just a little little nub on the polymer, and there's also a plastic pin. So again, be careful getting these off. They do protrude past the bottom just a hair so that you can get under them, and then of course hang on to them because of the spring. They did give you a nice big hole in the metal so you can hold it and line it up to make, and then the dimple is fairly small. So I keep those together just to make it easy in my mind. Realistically, I don't think you can put them in the wrong way very easily without really creating a mind-boggling situation for yourself. Anyway, so there's a couple of different things left here. You've got the sear system in there, and you've got the hammer, and you've got this much of the safety left. And what I'm going to tell you is that this is, in my view, pretty much the right time to relieve that hammer tension. And the way I've been doing this is keeping my fingers way the heck out of the way and just allowing these springs to come off. So making sure I don't have anything in the danger zone in the middle there. Danger zone. I'm just going to come in on the outside of that spring leg, pop it to the middle. Same thing on the other side. Now they're not holding the hammer under crazy tension anymore. So with those guys tension-wise disengaged, this bushing, so the hammer rotates on not this bar with all the funky cuts, but a bushing that goes around it. So again, just gently slide that bushing out one side or the other. Don't hit it. Don't let it deform in any way. It's a nice, perfect cylinder. Let it, you want it to stay that way. You don't want it to get scratches, all that good stuff. And at that point, the hammer can come all the way out. You will have to be pushing up on the sear system to do that. Now, I put it together, or I took it apart this way because this is also the way I've been putting it together. I could not get the sear and the firing pin safety to line up. I couldn't get their springs in set up if I had put the hammer in first. I just found there wasn't enough room for my fat fingers, and it was a total suck fest. These springs, well, we'll see in just a second, a little bit of a pain, so I know that I'm gonna wince when I do this, but you can just grab that safety leg and that'll pull the pin out with it. And what you'll find is on the sear side of the equation, both of the springs are on a little bit of a barrel, a little cylinder that's permanently affixed to the sear. And firing pin safety activator, I'm going to slide the springs off for a second. And here you can see the way the two of them come together, just so that they can be lifted independently on the sear side, but if the firing pin safety goes up, it's got that little ledge to lift the other one up with it. So the way these springs work, and they are sighted, so you want to make sure the right one's on first, and let's just look at one real quick. So spring, and then two little wavy arms, and the wavy arms go over the curved part of the relevant piece. So that's how the left string is the sear spring, and there's a curved part of the sear right there that it's going to put pressure on, and then inside the frame, this ledge right here is not on top of it, like I made a mistake, it's really easy to put them on the top, but that's not what it's for. It actually goes, the other leg goes in this slot, and that's what makes putting it together such a biatch. This leg for the firing pin safety, similarly, is going to lay on this side. Now, if I flip this spring around, it's symmetrical, but it's not interchangeable. They are opposite wound, which means that if I hold them up right next to each other, one leg is on the bottom, the other leg's on the top, and no matter how much I flip them around, that's not going to change. If they're in the same orientation, they're wound in opposite directions. And that matters because you want the part that is against the safety and the firing pin to be as far to the outside as possible, and that leaves the other parts essentially touching on the inside right next to each other. So that's going to be the orientation of the two of them when it's all put together. Now that is a big pain in the booty, so we'll get there in just a second. There's one metal pin, and it goes through the hammer bits, or the hammer springs. The other parts of this mechanism are just two plastic pins that hold it together. If you do take this all the way off, like I'm about to, don't lose the springs. Preferably even hang on to them so you can keep them in the right orientation. Similar to the story with the sear springs, the hammer legs are in the middle, and there is a left and a right, and if you don't put them together right, you won't be able to put it together. Now, I will say the danger of how I've been getting them on and off is that it does wear down this ledge pretty quickly. So I'm thinking that if I were smarter, I would either relieve that pressure and bring them off, or simply begin to spread the rear, and that would make it so they have more room to come off as I chowder up. Wow, I've been watching too much AVE. As I chew up that part of the frame, I feel the regret already. The other thing to keep an eye on is the ejector is sharp as something extremely sharp. It's really sharp. I've stabbed myself with it multiple times, and it doesn't get any more fun. But should it break, I know that I can at least replace just that piece, because it just sits in right in there, form fitted. So putting this bad boy back together is pretty much, I'm just going to do it in the opposite order of taking it apart. Line the, whoops. There we go. Line up all the bits. And now, highly recommending, gotta take another swig of water, bear with me. Alright, so slave pin. I sat down for a few hours yesterday, failing to come up with a trick, something that would make this easier, some piece of magic secret sauce. And what I came up with in the end was, no, just use a damn slave pin. For my slave pin, I'm using, I found an old spray tube for some random chemical, and it's not the best. Could be a little wider, but it's going to do the job, because all I need is something to hold this together long enough for me to get it inside the part of the frame that it goes on, where I don't really have any room for my fat fingers. And the real goal is to get these guys, these two legs here, into their target destination, which is not over the top and not all the way underneath, but tucked. Whoop! And there my slave pin went walkabout. That's why having the exact right size slave pin is often helpful. So once I get this just a little bit started, in theory, I should now be able to see if I got either of the legs where they were supposed to go. And survey says, no, I'm a total failure. So I'm going to bring them up just a little bit and try again. So that worked. I got Mr. Screwdriver up under there and tucked them in where they belonged. And now I'm going to replace the slave pin with the real pin. Of course, requires some bit of coaxing. There we go. Always helps to be able to see, so once I got the slave pin out of the way, I could push down on it which was what it needed. It was just a little bit off. So I can see my little legs in there on the inside, and that's just exactly what we want. Now what this does do is add a little bit of an element of challenge for getting the hammer. Oh, I'm sorry, you know what? There's one other part of this that comes apart, should you have some burning desire to say, I took it all apart. The hammer strut is actually on a pin. And again, this is the ledge that it pulls on for the double action, and the strut is not actually involved in the single action. And that pin is not under any particular tension. It's held in just because it has nowhere to move left and right. This, however, there's a shelf that this rides along. So this little opening matches the top shape there. That's where it has to be. And while we have all this other stuff in the way, like our sear system, it's going to be a little hard to get the hammer in there. The other thing we have to do at the same time as we do all that is hook the hammer legs into the hammer. So we're going to be putting the hammer in, getting the hammer strut lined up underneath all of the stuff it's supposed to be lined up underneath, and at the same time getting the legs in place. And I missed my hammer strut. There we go. Now I got my hammer strut, but I missed my other leg. There. Now I got two legs and a hammer strut, which last time I checked was everything. So I can see that my legs are on the inside, which means they will be pushing the hammer forward eventually. And the hammer leg is in its corridor. So, by the way, this leg here, remember, is the firing pin safety, and then consequently, if you push it really hard, it's also the sear. So whenever we need to move those guys up together, we can do that. You can always come around to this side and lift the sear independently. So lifting the sear and the firing pin safety, if I can get it all the way up, should let me get my hammer a little further in there. And that's much sexier. Alright, now that's going to let me line up to get the cylinder back through. So, oops, there we go. Fumble fingers. Just going to start it and then flip it over so I can manipulate it from this side. And again, be gentle with that cylinder. The last piece in the world you ever want to deform. And voila. We're good. So, hammer or firing pin safety lifts up, spring tension there. Everybody's in the right place. Last thing to do is reapply tension to the hammer legs. And we do that. I took this screwdriver and I filed a notch in it because I lost my one that I used to have. SIG makes one that comes with a notch. And essentially, a notched screwdriver is great for doing what I'm about to do. Which, you know, if I were smart, I would have actually... Some days. I'm not a smart man, Jenny. I want to return that to the all the way up position so that I am not pushing against a gajillion pounds of force when I do this. So basically you can grab the leg of the spring, and because I've got a notch in there, I'm going to be able to hold on to it a little bit better than otherwise. Probably could use a slightly bigger notch in this particular case. Oh, and I already bent my hammer back again. One. Two. So the other thing that I was doing when I did this is to make sure these guys are spread apart just a little bit, and make sure you didn't let the frame itself come apart. As long as everything is really tight together, those guys will stay where they're supposed to. But if you let this little piece start to slide apart, then they'll snap off and bite you in a big way. So for these ones, spring in the big hole, and you just line the spring up with the dimple there, and slide him over that. And this piece, you just remember, functionalize the big dingly bit that goes up front, where it can at some point in life interact with the safety. And on the flip side, again, spring in the hole, line up with the dimple in the plastic, line up with the pin in the plastic, get that piece on. And this one is a little harder to tell when you're not when you're just looking at it. There's, I don't know how to describe this one really well, but basically it's kind of got this flat side, and then, I don't know, what is that, a flower pot with a little thing there? I don't know how to describe it. Either way, this piece that sticks out is really the odd piece. If you hold it like that, it almost looks like a heart. I don't know how to describe it. The point is, it's this piece here with the most unusual shape that goes where that notch goes. And if it's in that position, it's unsafe. So since the gun's not unsafe right now, we're actually going to want to position him with that piece at the top, but not necessarily in the notch. So I think where I wanted him is actually like that. And that is going to line up everything all the way through. So I'm going to set that down for just a second and come back here and pop my rails in. L for left, L for love, and R for right. And once again, just remember the rails curve to the outside. With the hammer positioned all the way forward again, we were going to put it in, and we do that because we want to be able to catch the trigger bar, and it's hard to anywhere else. So, sorry about that. Putting it in, rotating it down, rotating it forward. There we go. So now, if we look at it from this side, the trigger bar is in there and behind everything that it's supposed to be behind. If the trigger bar is in front of that hammer leg on the inside, then you've got a big problem. And the one pin to rule them all. Just got to get started. Make sure that everybody's lined up. And it should go all the way out the other side, where this one pops on. And right now I'm not going to screw it back in, but that should get us to the point where we can see it working. So we've got our double action pull. Nothing here, but if I disconnect, now we've got a disconnect and safety, and what we discussed. Actually, I'm going to take this off because I'll mangle my safety otherwise. When I put the safety on, what did you see happen? But the disconnect, which is attached to the trigger bar, drops like a stone. And that means that the whole trigger bar, just watch the trigger bar, which is this piece of metal here, not this guy, but the one underneath it. When I flip that safety to on, so we can watch it from this side, boom, this little leg push down and push push that whole leg down. So now when I pull the trigger, I can't engage anything. I'm being held lower than the level of the firing pin safety and lower than the level of the hammer strut, so I can't interact with the sear system. So there's nothing else blocking it. It is simply a trigger disconnecting safety. And then if we want to watch the hammer disconnect, when I push that down and it drops, all it's going to lift up is the sear, which means that rather than going fully closed, which lands it in this notch, it's going to stop at this notch because the firing pin safety has not come up. So I'm going to thumb that so you can see it in slow motion. It lands there. Whereas if it were fired, what happens is you see the firing pin safety come up and then lift that up. And now, whoops, that same ledge that it used to catch on right there clears it, and the hammer comes all the way forward. So instead of getting caught there, it goes all the way forward. Oh, I didn't do the magazine safety, or the magazine release. How does that work? What have they done? I see two. Oh, good Lord. Well, I don't know why you would ever want to take the magazine out unless it was actually broken. And I feel like getting to it will suck. Let's see if I'm right. I think that if I can catch one of those springs somehow on something and bring it up, maybe. Distinct feeling that if I actually do this, I will never get it back together again. It's one of my favorite feelings. I need something with a hook. Properly done with the dental tool, I suspect. I can't tell if these springs are one piece of metal that's been wrapped around, or if they're actually two different pieces. When I pull that, it's binding on something, which implies that there's more to it than I see. So maybe we won't pull those out just yet without a little more RTFM. I want to see what that mechanism is like before I just dive right into it. I mean, it looks like they're just in that groove. And I think they're individual pieces of metal. I feel like that right side should come up. But when I pull it up, it pulls itself right back down, which implies that I really should be doing something from the bottom. Which implies that I probably need to take the whole thing back out, which is not that hard at this point, since we know that it pretty much stays together as a mechanism. I'll lift it out, tilt it forward, and now get a little bit better look at what I'm dealing with. Still need more light. Alright, try one more time like a idiot monkey. Ah, look at that. So, super secret tip, I think, was to give yourself some extra space by pushing the magazine release forward. I was just leaving it free in there, and I think it was interfering with the bits. I don't have one of the magazines in front of me, so that bit's important. So there is a correct left and right side to this. Basically, the way they design their magazine notch, it has a matching side. So when it's coming up like this, that ramp goes from bottom to top. We want to meet with a ramp that goes similarly. So as they engage, it's going to pull the safety over to the right until the springs snap it back to the middle. At which point, then the two pieces are completely the same size and lined right up. If we had this piece flipped over upside down, then it would probably close if you slam the magazine really hard. It would maybe get around it, and then if the magazine was full and you shook it really hard, it would be able to slide past that ramp. So again, focus on how it's basically, if you think of this piece and this piece as a cylinder that's been cut down the middle, you want them to meet where that cut would make them whole. That will cause them to work against each other the way you want. And then the other way to think about it is, if something was going to hang on this and hold a magazine, the magazine's going to want to push down. So you have a flat surface if it's this side up. If it's this side up, you got no flat surface. Nothing's going to hang on a point like that. So this side is up. The other thing I did here is, that is one spring, and we could take it all the way out, but then we'd have to get it back in the runners. And since it stayed in the runners, I'm inclined to not coax it any further out, and just let it be, and come in here and just guide him back down. And that bottoms out, and good to go. Check that. You should see it move over as those pieces pass each other. And now the one's on top of the other. We're good. All right. That's all the bits that you're allowed to take apart. The only thing we didn't go into, trigger bar, because it's dangerous, and you only do that if you're replacing it. Back straps, if you lost your manual, there's a little hole back here. Push in the hole, and that should get you started. It's just pushing down. This is all it is. It's not like, you know, Hulk force levels. But if you pulled down really hard, you'd be making a mess, so don't do that. I don't remember if I like this one better than the other one. It only came with 2. I was expecting 3. I might have to call them and say, hey, can I have another one? And it makes the ever so slightest click when that plastic piece ledges back out. Okay, holding my parts together, making sure I have all my parts. Put back in, tip forward to get around the firing pin. Settle you all the way back in. And slide back on. Shouldn't really encounter a whole lot of resistance there. In my case, trigger bar was up, which I guess if you wanted to be, if you would put the safety on when you did that, it would have lowered the trigger bar enough. With the safety off, the trigger bar sticks up a little, so you either have to push it down manually or flip the safety on, whichever, whatever. There we go. So, double action is long and, you know, painful, as all double actions tend to be. But the reset is not great, but not awful. There's a significant bit of take up after the reset again, though, just by how that thing is built to go. But with a 45, it still feels pretty darn nice, I won't lie. Some people would describe the trigger as spongy because it doesn't really have a crisp break. You have to pull through, and normally I don't like that, because when you have to pull through sponginess, it's usually a lot of different weights of sponginess, and that's why it's spongy. This is just really smooth and consistent, and so, you know, as you're pulling, it's kind of good to not know exactly where that break point is. You feel you hit that, you know, tension point. You know that you're beginning the break, but it is a little bit of a surprise when it does drop. Now, we could trigger job this. I said that it's not. It's kind of designed to be hostile to that, but if we think about what's going on with the decocker and the hammer, if you look, that's the whole part that you're pulling through at the end. Everything else is released at the end of your trigger pull. You are moving this piece up off of this piece. So the angle they engage at, how much they engage, it looks like it's got a pretty significant amount of engagement, and it looks like it's pretty much straight across. So I would say wow, that's a lot. That's like least a 32nd of an inch, if not a close to a 16th of an inch of engagement. And so you can make that different in a couple different ways. You can take that off the bottom of the sear, because the sear actually doesn't go all the way down onto the hammer. If I'm not mistaken, the sear is stopped on the plastic housing there, so that's what stops how far the sear goes down. So in theory, you could even build up the housing, put a piece of tape on it or whatever, and find out exactly where it goes. Because if you got the sear to stop, say, whoops, not there. I hope you can see all this. If our normal sear position was there, our break would be a whole lot shorter. Now we'd have to make sure it's 100% safe. That's reducing the amount of engagement significantly, but the break from here is nothing. So our issue is that, you know, we've got to drag that sear way up, and that's a long way to move. So again, either something off the bottom of it, changing the angle of the hammer just a little bit, or even taking a little off the hammer. I prefer to do the work on the sear itself when I can. You could get this to feel a little bit differently, but it has the advantage of being at an almost neutral angle here, though. It's only slightly positive, so that it does pull the sear back down. So it is, you know, just positive enough to do that. And but again, that's why it's even though it's what I would say spongy as it comes off, it's nice and consistent and smooth throughout the sponginess. All right, I'm babbling. Sorry about that. That's the FNX45. Hope you had fun. Maybe even learned something. And as we mentioned, trigger disconnect is what's going on in safety land, so ain't nothing happening till we do that. And then magazine drop. And like I said, with the magazine or the hammer drop, notice it goes to that half cock position versus all the way when you pull the trigger. That is the FNX45. Leave me other guns you want to see done. Coming up, we've got a Ruger, I think it's an SRC9, I don't remember, and another FN, I think it's the FNS40, and those will be coming up in a few days, probably both by next weekend. Thanks for watching. Leave a like if you made it this far. Appreciate y'all coming back. Stay safe.